Hey everybody, welcome back to Nifilmism. I'm Ryan.
I'm Drew.
So someone brought up the other day, isn't it a little bit arrogant for someone to say this director doesn't understand their own work? And I've been thinking about that question for quite a bit. And there's two directors that keep coming up in regards to that question, and that's George Lucas and Ridley Scott.
Probably the two best examples, especially in terms of their works or the legacy of their works being in the forefront still.
Well, at first, my gut reaction was, okay, these guys may have really become bad directors or whatever over the years, but to say that they don't understand their own work, I mean, it was these guys' works. But then I started to think about it a little more. Star Wars is just Campbell's hero's journey put into space.
Yeah.
And Ridley Scott, I mean, Blade Runner was a Philip K. Dick novel, so it's not like it was his to begin with. So I guess we'll talk about that. Do these people, do these two guys, and which one understands their own work less?
Just to start, I would say I think by virtue of Star Wars being super simple and being at its nature an archetypal construct, Lucas understands it. He just decided to go in horrible directions with it. You see, what came out was that his proposal that never would have happened because he never would have made.
Oh, the midichlorians.
Yeah, this whole midichlorian and Will's arc and all this, and it's just that's you trying to keep your name in the press after you've already sold off and are seeing that maybe Disney's not making as much money, and on the heels of what surprisingly was the best of the standalone movies,
which is the one that did the worst.
All the standalone movies.
Yeah, it was the one that did the worst, but it was the best of them. But that brings up gets back to another question though. Does he really understand it? Because I mean the hero's journey is. I don't remember Campbell writing about midichlorians.
No, I mean if you want to get into the semantics of it, but at its base isn't a big part of that. The idea of that there's a chosen one, and that's his way of you see even scientifically he was a chosen one or something like that. I don't care to give the Starbucks man that is George Lucas anymore credence. I mean, everybody who's delved into it and has heard the stories of how his first wife saved the entire original Star Wars in editing because it was just a god awful mess. So you could argue that he never even understood it from the beginning. He just had a fever dream about space and classic mythology and plugged it all together.
What about Scott?
I think Ridley Scott almost actively works to troll his own fans.
Is it trolling though? I mean, is it just this is what I've decided is my vision, and if you don't agree with me changing my vision, now is it? Oh,
it does feel very latent with him, especially with all the numerous cuts of Blade Runner.
Yeah,
and everybody questioning him why did you splice in that footage of the unicorn, and him just committing hardcore to the Deckard's always been a replicant. It's always been laid there. And
the guy that did the screenplay said no, it wasn't. As far as we know, in the original Android's Dream of Electric Sheep novel, there's nothing to indicate that he was. But at that point, I mean, Ridley Scott did direct it. How much ownership does he have of the movie?
Enough of it, because, especially with Blade Runner, most people who even enjoy it will argue that it is a very simple story at its core, and that its aesthetic is what really brings it above. And I think you have to credit the director for the aesthetic of what you're seeing.
Fair enough.
So, and then not even with Blade Runner, just the whole continuing to demystify everything around the Alien franchise, which I have real contention with. I mean, I have begrudgingly watched was it the second one, Alien Covenant? I watched it on HBO the one day, and
I didn't know you watched it.
Just when stuff that comes after completely just ruins what was horrifying about the unknown. That's just me with my connection with the xenomorph ideas. It being unknown is what made it scary. When you've clearly defined its origin at this point, it completely removes all of that.
It does sort of move it back.
It's kind of, you don't want to know how the hot dog or the sausage is made, just that it's made and that it's there.
Okay. That being said, does he wasn't the screenwriter on the original Alien, was it?
I doubt it. I'd be amazed to find out.
That whole first movie, I forget the name of the guy that wrote it, but I saw an interview with him where he was talking about how the entire premise behind it was that he wanted to scare the males in the audience, not by doing your traditional horror stuff, but going for straight on rape.
Yeah.
Like the oral rape of the face hugger and the idea of a man giving birth. In this interview, he flat out said that he wanted to transfer female fears onto men and use that as a way to try to scare them. So
it's a clever idea.
Did Ridley Scott ever get it? Or was it just something about an alien?
I think it was just... I think
in his head,
it's one of those...
In his head, did he understand?
Well, the thing is, like with him, I feel like it's a moving benchmark. I feel like the older he gets, the more ownership or the more control he wants to take over stuff that he's known for. And that's where he's kind of like, oh no, in my head, to me, it's always been this or that. And it's like, well, that's not in the original cut of Alien or like Blade Runner. Like, where's that come from?
Is that why so much of the themes of, like, let's say, the new Alien movies are about finding your creator? Is he supposed to be that creator?
Yeah, I don't know. He's going full meta with.
Is he? I mean, seriously, is he going full meta with it?
Just what is the true origin of this tale? Basically, is it me or is it the screenwriter? I don't know. I think that's too heady for a man who thinks that Deckard's a replicant.
Oh, back to Lucas then. What about Indiana Jones? I know he had minimal input in Crystal Skull.
Really, I heard that he was the reason that the movie was what it was.
But he had minimal direct, I should say.
Direct input, but
he had
input.
Yeah, Spielberg in an interview went and said, well, we had to have everybody on the same page and agree, including Lucas.
Was he in the room with his...
I kind of almost took as there were some things that George really wanted in the movie, so we had to put them in the movie.
Yeah. I think he was in a room with storyboards and 3 colors of highlighters.
Just saying more intense and...
More intense and this we can do fake, this we can do fake, this real. Oh, no. One of the greatest documentaries if you want to see why a movie was terrible. I don't know. George Lucas has gone on record, though, saying that at heart, he'd rather just constantly have made pictures like American Graffiti. He just always liked muscle cars and reliving his youth, and he'd rather just make a ton of that than why are your most memorable stuff, you know, even including your arguably student film, a sci-fi movie, like, or pulp-based.
Man, I had wanted to talk about, do these people understand it? And now I'm wondering whether or not they understood it to begin with, or whether or not this was just...
You can make the argument that Lucas has always just seen Star Wars as a very successful pulp, which honestly, I think a lot of people in the religion that is Star Wars need to kind of...
I don't disagree there. I
understand that it's classic good and evil pulp. It's engrossing at times and incomprehensible gibberish in contemporary times, but it's a case of these are people who made movies because they either had a good idea or they thought maybe, you know, they could grow their art by doing such a picture, and maybe it's just time that everybody takes a little step back and it's just like, maybe we are reading too much into these properties as they are. Maybe there's a little bit of credence to, you know, it's just a lark. It's fiction. It's a work. But
that sort of gets under. That's what I think people should understand until you get someone like Scott, who is almost feeding into that himself by going and trying to add layers of mythology where there weren't any.
Yeah. That's what I mean by the moving benchmark too, of how he keeps trying to layer stuff to make it seem that he had this deep, multi-leveled concept of what was there when most likely, in the George Lucas sense, he was just making a picture that was pretty cool and had a really engrossing story that took off in the cult situation.
And the whole thing's a shame too, because we're talking about two directors whose movies I love a lot of them. I mean, I grew up on Star Wars. You grew up on Star Wars. Yeah. Indiana Jones is still, minus of course the Crystal Skull, arguably my favorite franchise. It's right up there with Mad Max.
It's the franchise with what I think is the best third chapter of any trilogy. Because it's a trilogy. It's not a 4-picture movie. It's not a 4-picture franchise.
And the number of people I have talked to, if you're a male between probably 25 and 40 at this point, as a kid, you played and you pretended that you were Indiana Jones.
Oh, at some point, yeah.
There's something that universal about that character that it... That being said, Ridley Scott also has some other this stuff that we're talking about. Yeah. I don't know what the word is, but I really like Kingdom of Heaven. He can make a good movie. We're not here bashing
Can we just argue that Scott's the better director, regardless of what he's done to try to layer lore onto what he's made? He's got the better range of pictures at this point.
Have you seen Red Tails?
No.
So yeah,
the movie that Lucas claims is the first all-black film ever in the history of film. It came out in like 2008.
I would love to see Spike Lee's face when something like that gets said. But God, we went off topic, but sorta. But no, it's back to the original question though. Is it arrogant for a fan to ask if a director understands their own work? Or is that just a fan saying no, I'm a fan, therefore I understand it?
To a degree, I think there's a bit of that that real horror of running into somebody that basically has a scrapbook of something that you did for, a job.
Okay.
Hey man, you made a really good mana art for a magic card. I've got a scrapbook of every other work you've done, and it's just like, whoa. I appreciate the gesture, but you stay within the circle of I don't expect you to stab me.
And that's sort of where the conversation, I don't want to come off as acting like one of those people. But can you watch?
I'll pick my spots. Where I want to be the insane. No, I'm super into whatever the established lore of something is.
I think with something like Blade Runner, though, you can do that because there's other source material that predates Ridley Scott's involvement.
Yes.
And then there's later stuff like 2049, which he had nothing to do with, which is, I'm just going to say it, far superior to the original because it gets the themes of the original book and the original screenplay prior to Scott's meddling and does them better.
Well, and something like Blade Runner is far more... You can interpret what you want to out of it. What you get out of it could be different from somebody else.
True. Yes.
I mean, just like poetry, there's an intended message there, but certain verses might resonate with somebody more personally than others.
Yeah, if you wanted to write an op-ed, you would have written an op-ed, not a poem.
Yeah.
So I guess back to the other question is, who understands their own works the least?
The least? I would have to say Ridley Scott, because George built Star Wars into an empire and then played the martyr when he sold it for a pittance in his eyes. But I don't know. Ridley Scott is out here trying to basically add revisionist history to the Alien franchise because he's getting older and that's what he knows, and he's gonna get you to understand his message because it's canon now. Damn it.
I'm gonna play devil's advocate just for the sake of us not agreeing on this.
Okay.
For the record, my gut reaction was to say Ridley Scott.
That he understands more.
I'm agreeing with you.
Is it just because he keeps making movies to make his vision the reality.
And that's just it. If his vision was his vision and he's making more movies consistent with his vision,
Yeah.
then does he understand his vision?
Yes.
Yes.
His vision, capital H, his vision. Yeah.
Which I guess leads to the question of, is his vision just shit?
Yes. I mean, the Android stuff. Well, how much of the Android stuff is good, or is it or is it Michael Fassbender is a great actor?
Absolutely. He is a great actor. And if you had a whole movie of just Fassbender talking to Fassbender, I would watch that every day because it was the best part of the movie.
But it just gets heavy-handed and theological and
that's fine.
And
that's consistent with his career.
Didn't this start with a gas mining ship getting a stowaway?
Yes, yes, it did.
Didn't this start about wasn't the early core of this about corporate greed and deniability?
And just a classic horror movie where, like I was saying earlier, the screenwriter wanted to take traditionally female fears and project them onto men.
Yeah,
which is it works.
Yeah, it's I guess you could say because
you could even argue that nobody really has ownership of the Alien franchise because of the first three, you have three completely different visions between Cameron, Scott, and Fincher.
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, Alien has that caveat of arguably the best Aliens. Alien 3 is really good. When you really think about it, Alien 3 is pretty damn good.
The older I get, the more I appreciate Alien 3 and just
it's that classic long form like series based. We're just gonna return to what works.
Which is kind of funny
that's kind of refreshing.
Alien 3 and the
Alien 3 gets points because it has Charles Dance in it.
Of course, and Ron Perlman.
Yes. No, Perlman's in
Resurrection. Oh yeah, never mind.
That was
forgot I said that. I might edit that out. I might leave it in for my own embarrassment.
Joss Whedon.
Yeah.
Does anybody understand their works less than Joss Whedon?
Oh.
No. Alien is helped by the fact that it had other directors injecting their vision and basically, so for lack of a better term, corrupting what Ridley Scott thought was going to be the overarching theme.
Well, in that, I mean, going back to the previous context, I guess it's kind of ironic then that Ridley Scott and David Fincher both have gone out of their way to undermine all of the themes of the original Alien, well, at least Aliens in terms of Fincher, and turn it into something that was definitely their own. Lucas, though.
Yeah,
but I think
Lucas had full control over his saga, and just wasted 2.5 movies on the opening paragraph in the prequels. Anybody with a proofread would have been, this is all the preamble stuff.
Well, I would argue that he doesn't understand Indiana Jones then.
Yes.
I think this is a better microcosm because you could argue all you want about, let's say, midichlorians and the prequels and how they relate to the original Star Wars. And maybe this really is just like how George Miller, when he finally got the opportunity, he was able to go back and make Fury Road, which is clearly what he had in mind all the time, and it ended up being the best of the franchise.
Yeah.
Whereas now George Lucas had a chance to go back and do what he really wanted the whole time, and it involved midichlorians. And it was, of course, worse because he was able to do what he wanted with it. So I would argue Indiana Jones is a better example of why he just doesn't understand his own characters or anything about what makes Indiana Jones such an appealing character. I mean, Crystal Skull is awful.
Yeah.
Because, sure, beat for beat, it took its cues, at least from the structure of the others.
Yeah.
But
all I ever remember from that movie is Capoeira on a clear set with Indian men and vine swinging and ants and fridges.
Growing up, Indiana Jones is one of the things that I will say sparked my love of history. Indiana Jones had such a sense of adventure of wow, here's something semi supernatural.
Yeah.
There's
Pseudo historical
there-
artifacts and fun
yeah,
stuff like
just
that.
the-
That was
the
just
ent-
interesting.
The entire idea that there is stuff that is still hidden in our world, lost kind of like the One Ring to history, that maybe if you're intrepid enough and smart enough and just badass enough, because let's face it, Indiana Jones is a badass, that you could get out there and you could discover this for yourself. And you got to live that through him, even though in the back of your head you knew that it wasn't realistic, but it was just grounded enough.
Yeah.
And Crystal Skull lost all of that.
Yeah. Just
So yeah, based on that, I'm gonna switch my answer. I'm gonna say George
fuck
Lucas.
George Lucas.
George Lucas it's a close one.
Yeah.
Ridley Scott doesn't understand.
He gets the the little asterisk because he didn't make every Alien movie. He didn't have a vision that he left turned. Like George Lucas had a
Yes.
concept that left turned once he made the prequels and decided that that was going to be the be all and end all of this rough outline that he had for a picture that he made because Fox gave him a chance.
So I'm going to end it on that then. I'm going to at least say that's my final answer. That Ridley Scott certainly doesn't understand his own works, but that's because he never did. He never understood the films that he was making to begin with.
Because they were his. They
Because
were
they
wholly
weren't
his. Yeah.
his. Stuff that maybe his brother, I think, helped him with. Maybe he had a better understanding of that sort of stuff, and that's why
it makes sense when you think that Lucas was the sole creator of the six pivotal Star Wars movies that torpedoed the entire franchise in the back half.
And yeah,
And he sold them to the white slavers. That line just will be etched in history.
On his tombstone.
Just his gilded tombstone.
Yeah, and it all comes down to not their biggest franchises, but fucking Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
That is a franchise that was consistent, and then when he was given the chance to keep it going and not just take the direction he wanted, he couldn't even get it right a second time. It's not just sequelitis. No. It was a clear lack of understanding of what made Indiana Jones so great to begin with.
No, at the end of the day, it was the artifacts. That was all that really mattered. Not the journey. Not the character's journey.
Anything else to add?
No, I think that's succinct enough.
All right. Well, thank you again for listening. This was just sort of an impromptu one we wanted to do. We will hopefully be back soon with some more content for you. Thanks for listening.
Bye.